You're not on any list. No record, no clearance, nothing. As far as this command is concerned, you don't exist.
Then maybe the list was never meant to remember me.
Detain him. The command cut clean through the still morning air, sharper than the distant hum of rotor blades circling above the cemetery, and every conversation, quiet, respectful, rehearsed, collapsed into silence as two military police officers stepped forward in perfect sync, their polished boots grinding against the pale gravel, their gloved hands reaching for the old man standing alone at the edge of the front row, just 12 feet from the flag-draped casket. Samuel Vance did not turn. He did not raise his hands. He did not even acknowledge them. His eyes remained fixed on the coffin as if the rest of the world had already faded out of relevance, as if the rows of decorated officers, the black sedans, the silent cameras, and the layered security perimeter meant nothing to him. Around him, heads began to shift, murmurs rippling outward like a slow-moving tide, confusion first, then discomfort, then something closer to unease. This was not how these ceremonies went. Not here. Not at this level. Lieutenant Eric Nolan pushed forward through the tightening circle, his jaw set, his voice controlled but carrying the unmistakable edge of authority that had never been questioned. "Sir, you are not authorized to be here." He stopped just short of the old man, scanning him quickly, no visible insignia, no identification badge, no formal invitation marker. Just a worn black suit that hung slightly loose across narrow shoulders and a posture that, despite the years etched into it, refused to collapse under scrutiny. Name. ID, clearance level, Nolan continued, each word clipped, procedural, practiced. Samuel didn't respond. The MPs hesitated, their training colliding with something harder to define, something in the way the man stood, unmoved, as if being surrounded was an expected outcome rather than a threat. A breeze moved through the cemetery, stirring the edges of the flag on the casket, the fabric lifting just enough to catch the light before settling again. Samuel's right hand shifted slightly, not in defense, but downward, revealing what he had been holding all along, a single metal dog tag, dulled by time, its edges worn smooth. Nolan's eyes dropped to it instantly. "That doesn't belong to you," he said, sharper now, stepping closer. "Hand it over." Samuel's voice came then, low, steady, almost lost beneath the wind but somehow heard by everyone closest to him. "Not anymore." The words didn't carry defiance. They carried finality. Nolan frowned. Irritation tightening his expression as he gestured to the MPs, "Take him." The officers moved in, but before their hands could make contact, a voice from behind the formation cut in, controlled but urgent. "Lieutenant, wait." Major Claire Dawson stood several yards back, her eyes locked not on Samuel's face, but on the dog tag now catching a thin sliver of sunlight. She stepped forward slowly, her pace measured, her expression shifting from confusion to something colder, more focused. "Sir," she said carefully, addressing Nolan but never looking away from the metal tag, "we need to verify that before we proceed." Nolan exhaled sharply. "There's nothing to verify. He's not on any list." Dawson didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for the small tablet at her side, fingers moving quickly, accessing a database most of the officers present didn't even know existed. For a brief second, the screen reflected in her eyes, and then she froze. Not dramatically. Not visibly to most. But enough. Enough that the tone of the entire scene shifted again. She looked up, directly at Samuel now, studying him in a way no one else had. "Where did you get that?" she asked quietly. Samuel didn't move. Didn't look at her. His gaze never left the casket. "He gave it to me," he said. And for the first time since the command had been issued, the tension in the air didn't feel like control. It felt like something slipping. The wind shifted again, colder now, carrying with it the faint metallic rattle of flag clips against their poles, a small sound that seemed to echo louder than it should as every pair of eyes in the front rows locked onto Major Dawson. She did not blink. Her gaze stayed fixed on the dog tag in Samuel Vance's hand, her breathing measured, controlled, but just slightly shallower than before. Lieutenant Nolan noticed it immediately. "Major," he said, his tone tightening, "I need you to confirm whether this individual is cleared or not." Dawson did not answer right away. Instead, she took one more step closer, closing the distance until she stood just a few feet from Samuel, close enough to read the warning engraving on the tag without asking for it. The letters were faded, almost erased by time, but not completely gone. A name. A service number. And something else beneath it that did not belong on. Standard issue identification. Her eyes flickered once, quickly, then returned to stillness. "Sir," she said, quieter now, her voice directed at Nolan but carrying a weight that did not match her rank, "we should not proceed with removal." Nolan's expression hardened. "That was not a recommendation," he replied. "That was an order." Around them, the tension tightened further, the crowd no longer murmuring but watching in a kind of suspended silence, as if instinct alone told them something had shifted beyond protocol. One of the MPs adjusted his stance, uncertain, his grip loosening just enough to betray hesitation. Samuel remained exactly where he was, unmoved, his attention still on the casket, the flag rising and falling slightly with each passing gust. Dawson exhaled slowly, then reached for her radio, hesitating for the briefest fraction of a second before switching to a secure channel. "Command, this is Major Dawson," she said, her voice steady again, professional, but stripped down to its essentials. "I need immediate verification on a potential identity match." There was a pause. Static. Then a response, clipped and distant. "Send the identifier." Dawson's eyes dropped once more to the dog tag. "Name reads Daniel Mercer," she said carefully. "Service number partially degraded. There is an additional marking beneath it. Non-standard." Another pause, longer this time. Nolan crossed his arms, impatience settling into something sharper. "We already know who is in that casket," he said, gesturing slightly toward the front. "This is not relevant." Dawson did not look at him. "Sir, I recommend we hold position." The radio crackled again, but this time the voice that came through was different. Older. Slower. "Repeat the name." Dawson swallowed once. "Daniel Mercer." The silence that followed was immediate and absolute, as if even the wind had paused to listen. Then, quietly, the voice returned. "Stand by." Nolan stepped closer to Dawson now, lowering his voice. "Major, you are overstepping." She shook her head, just once. "No, sir. I think we already did." He did not have time to respond. The sound of engines rolled in from beyond the cemetery gates, low and controlled, the kind of movement that did not rush because it did not need to. Several heads turned at once. A black vehicle had entered the perimeter without announcement, escorted but not delayed, moving straight toward the ceremonial line. The MPs instinctively stepped back half a pace, their formation loosening as attention shifted away from Samuel for the first time since the command had been given. Dawson lowered the radio slowly, her eyes still on Samuel. "Who are you?" she asked, barely above a whisper now. For the first time, he moved. Not much. Just enough to lift his gaze slightly from the casket, not toward her, but somewhere beyond, toward the approaching vehicle. His answer came just as quietly. Someone he did not forget. And somewhere behind them, a door opened. The door did not slam. It did not need to. It closed with a quiet, deliberate weight that carried farther than any raised voice, and every uniform within 20 yards instinctively straightened as a single figure stepped out from the black vehicle, his presence shifting the air before he had taken more than 2 steps onto the gravel. General Robert Kane did not look at the crowd, nor at the officers lined in perfect formation, nor at the flag that moved gently above the casket. His eyes went directly to the old man standing alone at the front, and for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them that no one else could read. Lieutenant Nolan turned sharply, snapping to attention, his voice firm but edged with uncertainty. "Sir, we have a situation under control." The words sounded correct. They felt correct. But they did not land. Kane did not acknowledge him. He continued forward, each step measured, unhurried, the gravel shifting under his boots in a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to pull the entire ceremony into alignment with it. Major Dawson stepped back without being told, clearing a path that had not existed seconds earlier. The MPs lowered their hands completely now, retreating half a step, then another, until Samuel stood unrestrained once more. Nolan hesitated, then followed protocol, stepping aside as well, though his eyes never left the man he had ordered removed. General Kane stopped 3 feet in front of Samuel Vance. Up close, the contrast was unmistakable. One wore rank that carried decades of command. The other wore none at all. And yet neither appeared diminished by the presence of the other. The wind moved again, lifting the edge of the flag just enough for the sunlight to catch the precise fold along its surface. Kane's gaze dropped briefly to the dog tag in Samuel's hand, then returned to his face. When he spoke, his voice was low, controlled, and absent of performance. "Where did you get that?" Samuel did not hesitate. "He gave it to me," he said again, the same words, unchanged, but heavier now under the weight of who was listening. Kane's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Around them, the stillness deepened, the kind that does not come from silence alone but from recognition just beginning to form. Nolan shifted his stance, unable to contain the tension building in his chest. "Sir, with respect, we have no record of this individual," he said, forcing the words out with precision. "He is not cleared for this ceremony." Kane finally turned his head, just slightly, enough to acknowledge the voice without fully breaking his focus. "That is correct," he said. The confirmation landed like a validation, and Nolan straightened further, preparing to continue. But Kane did not stop. "There is no record," he repeated, his tone unchanged, "because there was never meant to be one." The words settled slowly, their meaning not immediate, not simple, but impossible to ignore. Dawson's breath caught, just once. Samuel did not react. Kane looked back at him fully now, something in his expression shifting from command to something quieter, something older. "I wondered if you would come," he said. It was not a question. Samuel's eyes finally moved, lifting from the casket to meet the general's for the first time. "I told him I would," he replied. "No rank. No title. Just a promise." The wind stilled completely. And in that moment, the ceremony no longer belonged to protocol. It belonged to something that had been waiting much longer than any of them. For a long second, no one moved, as if the weight of that quiet exchange had pressed the entire ceremony into stillness, and then General Kane did something that no one present had expected and no one had been prepared to process as he took one step back, straightened his posture, and raised his hand in a precise, deliberate salute directed not at the flag, not at the casket, but at the man standing in front of him, and the effect was immediate and absolute as a ripple moved through the formation, officers snapping to attention almost reflexively, their training colliding with something deeper, something older than protocol, while Lieutenant Nolan remained frozen half a second too long, his mind struggling to reconcile what he was seeing with everything he had been taught about order and hierarchy, and Major Dawson lowered her gaze, not out of confusion but recognition, because in that single motion the situation had shifted beyond any authority she could interpret through regulation alone, and Samuel Vance did not return the salute, not out of disrespect but because he did not need to, because the gesture was not a request or a formality, it was an acknowledgement, and slowly, almost reluctantly, Kane lowered his hand, his expression composed but no longer guarded, and when he spoke again, it was not to Samuel but to the space around them, to the officers, to the witnesses, to the entire carefully constructed structure of the ceremony that had just been interrupted. "Stand down," he said, and the words carried not as an order shouted but as something final, something that removed tension instead of creating it. And the MPs stepped back fully now, their role erased in an instant, while Nolan exhaled sharply, the air leaving his lungs as if he had been holding it since the moment he gave the first command. "Sir, I was not informed," he began, but Kane lifted a hand slightly, stopping him without turning, "You were not supposed to be," he replied, and there was no reprimand in it, only fact, and that fact settled heavier than any correction could have, because it implied something larger than oversight, something intentional, something designed to remain unseen, and Samuel shifted his weight. Just enough to close the final distance to the casket, the movement small but unmistakable, and as he did, the dog tag in his hand caught the light again, the worn edges reflecting a dull, steady glint that drew Dawson's eyes once more, and this time she saw it clearly, not just the name Daniel Mercer, but the faint second line beneath it, barely visible, a marking she had only ever encountered once before in a classified briefing that had been shut down before questions could be asked, and her breath slowed, not from fear but understanding beginning to assemble piece by piece, and Kane watched Samuel now without interruption, as if this moment had been anticipated for years and had finally arrived exactly as it was meant to, and when Samuel reached the casket, he did not touch it immediately, he stood there for a second. His gaze steady on the folded lines of the flag, and the world seemed to narrow around that single point, the distant hum of the helicopter fading, the quiet shifting of shoes on gravel disappearing, until there was only the sound of the wind returning, softer now, almost respectful, and then, carefully, Samuel placed the dog tag on top of the flag, just above the center fold, not as an offering, not as a display, but as something being returned, and the simplicity of the gesture carried more weight than any speech that could have been given, and behind him, Kane spoke again, quieter this time, but heard by everyone close enough to matter. He carried that for 40 years, and no one asked who he meant, because in that moment, the answer was already there, resting in plain sight, where it had always belonged. No one reached for the dog tag. No one questioned why it now rested where medals were never placed and symbols were never altered, because the moment had already moved beyond regulation, beyond ceremony, into something that did not require permission to exist, and the silence that followed was not empty but full, heavy with recognition that had not yet been spoken aloud, and Major Dawson felt it settle into place piece by piece, the fragments aligning into something she had only glimpsed once in a briefing that had ended. Before it truly began, a mission referenced only by absence, a unit that had never officially existed, and a name that had been removed from every record she had ever had clearance to access, and yet here it was, not in a file, not in a system, but in a man standing quietly at the front of a funeral no one had expected him to attend, and she stepped closer, not enough to interrupt, but enough to see the engraving again, to confirm what her instincts had already accepted, and this time she spoke. Not to command, not to protocol, but to General Kane himself, her voice low, controlled, but no longer uncertain. "Sir, that marking beneath the name, it is not standard issue," and Kane did not turn immediately, his eyes still on Samuel, but when he answered, it was with the kind of calm that does not explain, only confirms, "No, Major, it is not," and that was enough to erase the last remaining doubt that this was not an oversight, not a breach, but something deliberately kept out of sight for reasons that extended far beyond the perimeter they were standing in, and behind them, Lieutenant Nolan shifted again, the rigidity in his posture now replaced by something less certain, something closer to realization, because every instinct that had told him to remove the man was now colliding with the undeniable fact that the highest authority present had not only allowed him to remain but had recognized him first, and that reversal did not come with explanation, only consequence, and Nolan lowered his gaze slightly, not in defeat, but in recalibration, the kind that comes when the rules you rely on reveal themselves to be incomplete, and Samuel remained where he was, his hands now empty, his focus unchanged, as if placing the dog tag had completed something that had been waiting far longer than this ceremony, and the wind moved again, lifting the edge of the flag. Just enough for the metal to shift a fraction of an inch, catching the light once more before settling back into stillness, and Kane finally stepped forward, closing the distance to stand beside Samuel rather than in front of him, a subtle shift that did not go unnoticed by those who understood what it meant, and when he spoke again, it was quieter than before, but carried further, not because of volume, but because of the weight behind it. "There are names that never make it into reports," he said, his eyes still on the casket, "because the missions they belong to were never meant to be acknowledged," and a few heads in the formation lowered slightly, not in confusion, but in recognition of something they had heard hinted at but never confirmed, and Dawson felt the final piece settle into place, the realization not sudden, but complete, and she looked at Samuel again, no longer as an unidentified presence, but as something far more rare, someone who had carried a part of history that was never written down. And beside the casket, Samuel finally spoke again, his voice steady, unchanged, but now carrying something deeper than before. He was not supposed to make it out, he said, not looking at anyone, not asking for acknowledgement, simply stating a fact that had lived with him for decades. And Cain nodded once, slow, deliberate. But he did, he replied, and for a brief moment, the two men stood there, not as rank and civilian, not as known and unknown, but as the only two people present who understood exactly what had been carried into that moment. And behind them, the ceremony did not resume, because it no longer needed to. It had already become something else entirely. The words did not echo, but they lingered, settling over the formation like a weight that no one could quite define. And for a long moment, no one spoke, not because they were waiting for permission, but because something deeper had taken hold, something that made interruption feel almost inappropriate. And the absence of sound became its own kind of acknowledgement, one that required no command to enforce it. And in that stillness, the details began to matter more than before, the faint creases in the folded flag, the subtle shift of sunlight across the polished wood of the casket, the quiet movement of the breeze brushing against the rows of uniforms. And Samuel Vance stood at the center of it without drawing attention to himself, without claiming space, and yet everything seemed to orient around him regardless. And Major Dawson found herself studying not what he did, but what he did not do. No attempt to explain, no effort to justify his presence, no glance toward the officers who had moments ago been ready to remove him. And that absence of reaction carried more authority than any spoken defense could have. And behind her, she could hear the faint click of Nolan's boots adjusting position again, the sound less rigid now, less certain, as if each movement required reconsideration. And when he finally spoke, his voice had lost the sharp edge it once carried, replaced instead by something measured, something searching. "Sir," he said quietly, addressing General Cain, but without the same force as before. "If there is no record, then how was he cleared to be here?" And the question hung there, not as a challenge, but as a genuine attempt to understand. And Cain did not answer immediately, his gaze still fixed ahead, as if the explanation required more than words. And when he did respond, it was with a calm that carried no need for elaboration. "He was not cleared," he said. And Nolan's brow tightened slightly, confusion flickering again. "But," Cain continued. Before it could surface, he was expected, and that single distinction shifted everything once more, because expectation implied knowledge, and knowledge implied that somewhere, at some level beyond visibility, Samuel Vance had never been absent at all. And Dawson felt that realization settle deeper, connecting the fragments she had already assembled, the erased files, the incomplete references, the missions that existed only in gaps between official reports. And she understood now that absence was not oversight, it was design. And Samuel took a slow breath, almost imperceptible, his posture unchanged, his attention still resting on the casket, but something in his expression softened just enough to suggest that the moment he had come for was nearing its end. And carefully, without drawing attention, he reached out and adjusted the dog tag slightly, aligning it so it rested straight against the fold of the flag. Not for appearance, but for precision, as if even now, after decades, details still mattered. And Cain watched the movement without interruption, then turned slightly, addressing no one and everyone at once. "There are men who operate where recognition cannot follow," he said, his voice low but steady. "And when their work is done, they return to silence because that is where they were always meant to remain." And a few officers lowered their gaze again, not out of confusion, but respect forming in real time. And Nolan stood still now, no longer trying to correct the situation, no longer trying to understand it through procedure, but simply witnessing it. And in that shift, the last trace of resistance disappeared, replaced by something quieter, something closer to humility. And beside the casket, Samuel finally stepped back half a pace, not leaving, not withdrawing, but creating space, as if the moment now belonged not just to him, but to everyone who had come to witness it. And the wind moved once more, lifting the edge of the flag, catching the light along the metal tag before letting it settle again. And for the first time since the command had been given, the ceremony began to feel complete, not because it had followed its intended order, but because it had arrived exactly where it needed to be. The formation did not relax, but it changed, subtle shifts passing through the rows of uniforms like a quiet current, shoulders lowering just a fraction, breathing evening out, the rigid edges of protocol softening into something more human, and for the first time since the interruption began, the ceremony began to move again, not because someone ordered it, but because it no longer needed to be held in place, and a senior officer near the rear gave a slight nod to the honor guard, a signal so small it might have gone unnoticed if not for the precision with which it was answered, as rifles were adjusted, boots aligned, and the slow, measured cadence of the service resumed, each movement deliberate, each sound controlled, but now carrying an added weight that had not been there before, and Samuel Vance remained where he was, no longer at the center, but not removed from it either, standing just to the side of the casket as if that had always been his place, neither guest nor intruder, but something else entirely, something that did not require definition, and Major Dawson found herself watching him again, not out of suspicion, but out of a need to understand the kind of presence that could exist without record and still command recognition at the highest level, and she realized that what made it unsettling was not the absence of information, but the absence of contradiction. Nothing about him felt out of place, despite the fact that he did not belong to any visible structure around him, and that realization settled deeper than any classified file ever could, because it meant that some roles were not defined by documentation, but by memory carried by those who had witnessed them firsthand. And behind her, Lieutenant Nolan stood motionless, his earlier certainty replaced by a quiet recalibration that was still unfolding, and when he finally spoke again, it was not to assert control, but to clarify what little he could. "Major," he said, his voice low, careful not to disrupt the ceremony as it continued, "you recognize that marking?" And Dawson nodded once, her eyes still forward. "I recognized what it meant," she replied, and Nolan hesitated. Then asked the question he had been holding since the moment the situation changed, "And what does it mean?" And Dawson took a slow breath before answering, her voice steady, but quieter now. "It means the mission was never supposed to exist," and the words landed without drama, without emphasis, but they carried enough weight to settle the last of Nolan's uncertainty into something more solid, something closer to acceptance, and he nodded once, not because he fully understood, but because he understood enough. And at the front, General Kane stepped slightly back, allowing the honor guard to move into position around the casket, their movements precise, synchronized, the ceremonial rhythm re-establishing itself. But even as it did, it no longer felt like a performance. It felt like a continuation, as if what had just occurred had not interrupted the ceremony, but completed it in a way no script could have accounted for. And Samuel's gaze remained steady, following each movement with quiet attention, not as an observer, but as someone who had seen versions of this before, under different skies, in different conditions, where recognition had not been possible and closure had not been granted. And for a brief moment, the wind shifted again, carrying with it a faint scent of earth and metal, and something in Samuel's expression changed, not visibly to most, but enough to suggest that the distance between past and present had narrowed, just slightly, just enough for memory to pass through without needing to be spoken. And as the honor guard completed their movement and stepped back, the silence returned once more, not empty, but full, and in that silence, the absence of Samuel Vance from any official record no longer felt like a gap. It felt like the final piece of a story that had never needed to be written down to be real. The final sequence began without announcement, the honor guard stepping forward once more with a precision that felt sharper now, not because their training had changed, but because the weight behind it had. Each movement carried a deeper meaning, each step measured not just in distance but in memory, and the slow, deliberate folding of the flag began, corners drawn in with exact care, edges aligned with a discipline that had been practiced thousands of times but never repeated in quite the same way. And as the fabric shifted, the dog tag resting on top moved slightly, the metal catching the light before settling again into the fold, and for a moment, it seemed as if the entire ceremony revolved around that small piece of worn steel, a detail that had not been part of the original plan, and yet now felt like the most important element present. And Samuel Vance watched it closely, his posture unchanged, his expression steady, but his focus unwavering, as if this was the moment he had come for, not the speeches, not the ranks, not the recognition, but this simple act of completion. And General Kane stood beside him, silent now, offering no further explanation, no additional context, because none was needed. The truth had already revealed itself in fragments, and those fragments had aligned into something whole, something that did not require confirmation. And behind them, Major Dawson felt that same understanding settle fully into place, the earlier uncertainty replaced by clarity that did not depend on documentation, and she realized that what made this moment powerful was not what had been said, but what had been preserved in silence, carried across decades without acknowledgement, without record, and now returned without demand, and Lieutenant Nolan stood still, no longer trying to interpret the situation through protocol, no longer searching for the correct response, because there was none, not within the structure he had been trained to follow, and instead, he simply observed, absorbing the shift as it unfolded, and as the honor guard completed the final fold, the flag was lifted carefully, held with both hands, its shape now precise, compact, symbolic, and for a brief second, there was a pause, a transition point where the ceremony could have returned to its original structure, where the folded flag would be presented according to tradition, but that moment passed without action, and instead, the officer holding the flag turned slightly, not toward the designated recipient, but toward General Kane, awaiting direction that had not been written into any script, and Kane did not hesitate, he did not consult, he did not explain, he simply nodded once, subtle but absolute, and the officer adjusted course immediately. Stepping forward toward Samuel Vance, the shift small in motion but enormous in meaning, and the crowd felt it. Instantly, a collective awareness that something unprecedented was about to occur, and as the officer stopped in front of Samuel, extending the folded flag with both hands, the silence deepened once more, no whispers, no movement, just the sound of the wind brushing lightly across the cemetery, and Samuel looked at the flag for a moment, not reaching for it immediately, his eyes tracing the edges, the precise folds, the space where the dog tag now rested hidden within, and when he finally accepted it, his hand steady, his grip firm but gentle, it was not a gesture of possession, but of responsibility, as if what he held was not just a symbol of loss, but the final piece of something he had carried alone for far too long, and Kane spoke then, quietly, just enough for those closest to hear. He never asked for recognition, and Samuel nodded once, almost imperceptibly. His gaze still on the folded flag, he did not need it, he replied, and the words settled into the silence, not as a conclusion, but as something that had always been understood, and as the ceremony reached its final stillness, no commands were given, no dismissal announced, because no one felt the need to move, not yet, not while the moment remained, complete and unbroken, held together by something far stronger than any official record could ever capture. For several long seconds after the folded flag was placed into Samuel Vance's hands, no one moved, not the officers, not the honor guard, not even the distant figures standing along the perimeter, because something in the air had settled into a kind of stillness that did not invite interruption, and Samuel stood there quietly, the weight of the flag resting against his palms, the hidden outline of the dog tag beneath the folds pressing faintly into the fabric, a presence that could not be seen, but could be felt, and his eyes remained on it, not searching, not questioning, but acknowledging, as if everything that needed to be said had already been carried within that moment, and beside him, General Kane straightened slightly, his role complete, yet he did not step away immediately, not until Samuel shifted his grip just enough to secure the flag against his chest, a motion small and controlled, but final, and when Kane did step back, it was without announcement, without drawing attention, blending once more into the structure of the ceremony that had now been irrevocably changed, and behind them, Major Dawson exhaled slowly, the tension she had carried since the first command finally releasing, not because she had received answers, but because she understood that some answers were never meant to be spoken, only witnessed, and Lieutenant Nolan lowered his gaze briefly, not in uncertainty anymore, but in quiet acknowledgement, his earlier authority replaced by something more measured, something that would remain with him long after the day had ended, and the rows of officers remained in place, no one breaking formation, no one stepping forward, because the moment belonged entirely to the man who had never been listed, never been invited, yet had been expected all along, and Samuel took one last look at the casket, the polished surface now reflecting only the sky above, the ceremony complete in form but transformed in meaning, and without hurry, without hesitation, he turned, not toward the central path where the dignitaries would exit, but toward the outer edge of the cemetery, the direction he had come from, and as he began to walk, the gravel shifted softly beneath his shoes, the sound steady, unhurried, and no one stopped him, no one called out, because there was nothing left to question, and as he passed through the line of officers, something subtle began to happen, one by one, almost imperceptibly at first. Shoulders straightened, hands rose, and salutes formed, not commanded, not coordinated, but given freely. Each one held just a second longer than regulation required, until the entire line stood in silent recognition of a man whose name would never appear in any official record. And Samuel did not look at them as he passed. He did not acknowledge the gesture, not out of disregard, but because he did not need to, because the respect had already been given in full. And as he reached the edge of the cemetery, the wind moved once more, carrying with it the faint rustle of flags and the distant hum of the world beyond the gates, and for a moment, he paused, just long enough to adjust his grip on the folded flag, ensuring it rested securely, and then he continued forward, stepping beyond the boundary without turning back, leaving behind no trace of his presence except the silence he carried with him, and in that silence, the truth remained, quiet and unspoken, that some men are never written into history, not because they were forgotten, but because the lives they saved became their only record, and that was enough.